Good morning. This is gonna be a good day. Wait for the downshift. So hello! Welcome to Scotland and welcome to the F12 TDF, and with us is also the Aston Martin DBS, and today we are on an idyllic V12 road trip. They're two quite different cars, but fundamentally they are front-engined, naturally aspirated V12 GTs. Today we're going to back-to-back them and take you along for the journey of driving some of the most beautiful roads in the UK. Dare I say it's some of the most beautiful in the world as we work our way up towards the Scottish Highlands. But first of all, let me introduce you to the cars. Okay, so everybody's got to stop for food, and we have come to the Green Welly stop. Convenient because there's fuel stop, but importantly food stop. And if we continue up this road here, this forks off and we're eventually ending up towards Fort William. Okay, so here are our two cars for the day. Let me introduce you to DBS and F12 TDF. The idea of today's concept really is the sort of ultimate V12 road trip. Both naturally aspirated V12s, both front-engined, and both sort of mega grand tourers. However, there is a pretty big difference. This car, DBS, by and large, a pretty powerful car at 510 horsepower. This, 770 horsepower, both rear-wheel drive. It'll be fascinating when we get these up in the mountains shortly to sort of compare the dynamics, but I just wanted to give you an overview of them. 8 years difference between the both of them. This is a 2008 car, the DBS, and this is a 2016 car, the F12 TDF. Now, one other fundamental difference is DBS is a manual car and this is twin clutch automatic. Both incredible opposite ends of the spectrum. Both have completely different characters and driving characteristics, which we're going to share with you shortly, but both thoroughly deserve their leg stretched after a fairly restrictive 2020 for obvious reasons. Okay, let's just open the bonnet on this one and then we'll check out the DBS while we're at it. It's just under here. There we go. Undo that. Come around here, find the latch. There it is. Behold, Italy's finest. 770 naturally aspirated horsepower from this V12 engine. The sound of this thing is outstanding. What is quite interesting is that despite the fact they are both NA V12s, the way that they sound, the way that they rev are so different. This is very light, very free flowing. The revs build up to 9,000 RPM and so quickly, and the throttle response is ultra sharp. Whereas the DBS, and in fact, while we're here, let's open the bonnet. And funnily enough, bonnet for DBS is actually in the passenger side footwell as opposed to driver's side. Just there you go, just under there, as opposed to driver's side on the F12. And here we are, UK's finest naturally aspirated V12, 6-litre V12, and the differences, I mean, actually, even in size and layout, they are both actually classed as mid-engined V12s, but they are front mid. Mid because they are actually pushed so far back and low out towards the dashboard that they sit sort of mid-mounted within the car. And again, you can see how far back the engine in the F12 goes, right underneath. It actually stretches, look, in line with the dash. It actually sits under here. So the sound that you get from the engine inside the cab of both of these cars, it's all about those ultra high revs, relying on horsepower right up to 9,000. And the relationship between the engine and gearbox on this, as we'll demonstrate in a minute, is outstanding. Anyway, close these down for now. This one too. The similarities don't stop there. All of the additional sculpture on DBS and TDF. Now don't forget, they're both based on existing cars. So TDF is based on the platform of the F12 and this is based on the DB9. But what both brands did was adopt heavy use of carbon fiber. And as with TDF, the DBS has every single body panel other than the doors are exclusive to DBS, and every single body panel other than the doors on the F12 TDF are also exclusive to the car. Now, I'm not entirely sure, but I reckon the majority of the changes from the bodywork point of view on DBS is majoritively styling. I mean, it just looks so incredible. I think it's a timeless style. It's almost come full circle. I think halfway through its life, it maybe began to look a little bit old, and then it just came full circle and it looks incredible again. And TDF, these guys have actually done a lot of work in the wind tunnel and the aero, developing more downforce. I mean, the difference in exaggeration here on this splitter with regards to downforce, that stuff is endless. So lots of details. This aero bridge here made out of carbon fiber. This whole wing here is carbon. You can't see it other than where they've stopped painting here. That isn't a carbon insert, they've just stopped the paint. So this whole section of the aero bridge is carbon fiber. And then of course, the biggest fundamental differences, despite the fact they're both front mid-engine V12s, is of course the transmission. Manual in the DBS, honestly, to interact with this thing is absolutely gorgeous. And then in the TDF, we do have of course, twin clutch box actuated by these extended carbon fiber, in fact matte carbon. That's one thing as well inside this car. All of the interior carbon is matte, which is gorgeous, and actuate the gearbox with the vast flappy paddles. Speaking of which, let's go and actuate some awesomeness. Also, just before we go, can we acknowledge that this is probably the most beautiful fuel filling station that I've ever stopped at? It's actually quite funny because while there is a petrol option, this is actually only diesel. This thing is even when you're going fairly steady, honestly, that sounds fast, but I'm going fairly steady, but it's well within the speed limit. It still sounds amazing. I think that's what's really important, particularly this day and age. Everything's becoming fairly sanitized. It's all speed, but over theatre. You know, like heavily turbocharged cars, unless you're 10 tenths or at least pushing on, the sort of drama's not there. But with this, you can enjoy that wonderful engine at road legal speeds. And then when you get up to areas like this, where you've got walls next to you, the sound of the exhaust reverberates off the wall back into the cabin of the car. And then you've got the view. Listen. What a machine. V12 to 9,000 naturally aspirated, 770 if you want to get technical, 771 brake horsepower. Oh, that was a dead animal in the road. Just honestly, I mean, for all of the performance benefits of a turbo, how fast do you want to go on the road? As a road car, naturally aspirated, the engine engagement that you get from cars like this is through the roof. Just listen to the relationship between the engine and the gearbox and these downshifts. You ready? It's just unbelievable. Honestly, it shifts as fast as a twin clutch PDK gearbox from the likes of a Porsche GT3, only double the amount of cylinders and another 250 odd horsepower. And still it manages to create those absolutely razor sharp instant shifts. And then you've got the brakes, and you can get some temperature into the tires. You can anchor on these brakes with hardly any slip. It's just remarkable. Now, I think one of the most genius bits of calibration of Ferraris of late is the independent damper and suspension control, meaning you can put it into race mode like it is now, and if you do encounter some more undulating and bumpy tarmac, you put it into bumpy road mode, and it literally is that. You press that, a little symbol comes on the dash here, and it comes up with bumpy road, and it does do a phenomenal job of ironing out the creases in the road. And that is actually one of the legacies as a result of the early development of the Ferrari 430 Scuderia with Michael Schumacher. He was the guy that said, look, car's brilliant in race mode, but when you get it on the road, it's just that little bit harsh. Why don't we leave the throttle response, transmission settings the same in race mode, but have the ability to dial back any bumps? And it's still here today. And then you've got the steering, and we've just conveniently come to this U-bend switch back here. It's a long, graceful left hooker. And when it weights up, actually, the steering on this, compared with the DBS, dare I call it, is actually delicate. It's quite a light steering input, and as you begin to turn in, the car feels so much smaller than it actually is. That is in part to the rear wheel steer. Fun fact, TDF was the first Ferrari to adopt rear wheel steer. But that wasn't just to virtually shrink the wheelbase. It was because Ferrari stuck two 7.5 section front tyres on this car, which led to such aggressive front end grip and turn in that they had to keep the front end in check. As a result, the overall confidence that the platform gives you is astounding. And then you add it together with what's going on in front of me, following the DBS into the Scottish Highlands. I mean, there's nowhere else I'd rather be. As a driver, as a petrol head, this is it. Sunny November in Scotland. I'm made up. Look at this. Deer just having a bit of a snack along the side of the road. Isn't that gorgeous? Okay, we just pulled over. Look at this. This for me, this is what Scotland's all about. These kinds of roads stretching over to the horizon, surrounded by mountains. Great tarmac as well. It's really, really smooth, plenty of traction. And this, just incredible views. Look at it. We've got this stunning river cutting through the countryside, just trailing the woods up into the hills there. And it goes on and on until eventually we're going to end up there on our way to Glencoe. Stunning. And what is better is we are accompanied by TDF and DBS. So I've just had the first session in the F12. We shall swap into the DBS and do a bit of a back-to-back. Seamless transition. Welcome to the DBS. So, I mean, this is actually the first time that I've done this. Hop straight out of the TDF, directly into the DBS. The feeling is immediate. They are so different. Not only because it's a manual, we'll touch on that shortly. Seating and driving position. Comparatively, the TDF is basically race car DNA. There is definitely this sort of thoroughbred feeling about it. Even from the seating position itself, your derriere is basically scraping the tarmac. You sit so low in that. The seats are very sculpted. They're quite hard. They are carbon back racing seats. They're not quite bucket seats, but they hold you in and they're firm. But the biggest difference is how low you sit. You really are cocooned within the car. And then you get into this car, and I've been pushing down the seat adjuster here thinking surely this goes lower than that, because immediately you feel like you're sitting so upright and on top of the car. And it's amazing what psychological impact that has on the way you drive and approach this car. This now feels a lot more like a Grand Tourer, quite sort of refined, luxurious, sophisticated. You get in the TDF and it feels like it's about to rip your head off, and it's a very focused driver's car. Really interesting, despite the fact, as we've been saying, on paper at least, they read quite similar, other than the 6-speed manual gearbox. And let's just touch on that. Listen to this, the ability to be able to interact with the clutch and the gear stick. Oh, it's so wonderful. And honestly, that rev matching, one thing I will say, and I'm planning on having this adjusted, is the throttle pedal isn't very well placed for heel toe. It's too far away from the brake, and as a result you have to literally heel and toe in order to make it work. So that can be a little bit uncomfortable at times, but it's just a small thing. And then we have steering. Now, actually, steering weight in this is a little bit thicker. It's a little bit heavier. The steering weight in the TDF, unless you're really on it, feels a little bit too light. It's better than the standard F12. There's definitely more weight in it, but I would actually like a little bit more weight. This has a beautiful weight to it. This is, of course, of the era when it was still hydraulically assisted. They weren't electronic steering racks. And so there is that sort of lovely, dare I say, organic weight feel about it. The main thing is just the way you feel about driving each car. In the TDF, you want to use all of those revs, because the last 1,000 RPM from 8 to 9, when you snatch that gear, particularly when you've got it into a race mode, it's just one of the most amazing road-going sensations I think one could possibly wish for. And in this car, you almost feel like riding the torque more. It's thick with torque, even low down. I would say this feels more torquey because this is less reliant on the revs and horsepower. It rides that bed of torque more. So it's thick with it. And actually, in this, because you're riding that torque, you end up, I wouldn't say short shifting, but you don't need to use those revs. Whereas in TDF, you want to, because all of the power runs out the whole rev band. Very different driving styles. One thing I will say, right now, we are skirting a lock. We're up here in the Scottish mountains in an Aston Martin. And for me, that's kind of as quintessential Scottish road trip as you're gonna get. In a DBS, skirting a lock in the sunshine. What a moment. And what about speed? Well, it will do it. Listen to it when you get on it. And the brakes are brilliant. So this also has carbon ceramics. Fun fact, this was the first, listen to it. This is the first Aston Martin to come with carbon ceramic brakes fitted as standard. Build the revs. Did you hear it just break traction for a second there? There's so much torque that in this weather, when the asphalt is cold, trying to get heat in these tyres is very difficult. And every now and again it can be a little bit spiky and actually mildly terrifying at times. That is a character trait that both of these cars share. High-powered front-engine V12s, rear-wheel drive. Before there's any temperature in these machines, you got to be on your game. Look at this view. This is the fantastic thing about Scotland. There's just constant beauty everywhere. Look at that. Far as the eye can see, the reflections of the mountains off the water, just gorgeous. So there we have it really. That is the back-to-back first drive of the TDF and the DBS. Let me know in the comments below. Preference, twin clutch, manual, Ferrari, Aston. It's really amazing actually to sort of get a feel for these two cars back to back. It's the first time I've done it, and also on some incredible driving roads. They're, you know, on paper, without seeing them, quite similar, but so different to drive. And I think they've both got their places in this world, but I think they're both equally stunning and offer something completely different from a driving experience point of view. So I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. As always, thanks so much for watching. I'm gonna enjoy this view, and you can join me back in Scotland very soon. Ciao for now.